Welcome back. Statistics South Africa says the price of goods on the factory floor, or producer price inflation as the economists call it, rose by 5.2% year-on-year to the month of December last year. This is a decrease from a figure of 6.8% in the year to November last year. It appears some of the items that pushed up prices were agricultural products, or what you and I would call food, and that the price of electricity is still having an impact on how much money you have in your pocket. Patrick Kelly is the Chief Director responsible for price statistics at Statistics South Africa. Patrick, good evening. Welcome to the Full View. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you so much.
So PPI coming in at 5.2% year on year. What's driving prices up at the moment? What are the main sort of factors in that basket that are pushing prices up?
Well, first of all, PPI is really talking at a headline level about manufactured goods. And here, petrol is a key one. It contributes a large part of our overall manufacturing industry. This has actually come down a little bit, which is why we've seen the rate come off. But we do know that petrol over the year has risen quite sharply, and that means that the rate that we're seeing now is somewhat higher than what we saw a year ago.
I mean, for most people, I think petrol's been a big variable. Just before Christmas, people were shouting, screaming, protests about it. It shows you how important petrol is in terms of a multiplier effect in our economy and how it makes people feel.
Well, it certainly does. We don't really have that much view on how people feel about it, trying to measure it as precisely as possible. Look, petrol does have a big impact, but if you look at CPI, for example, although petrol prices have increased quite substantially, overall CPI has been fairly moderate, and so we don't see significant pass-through at a short-term level of petrol prices coming through. If we look at the relationship between PPI for food and the CPI for food, they're very close to each other. CPI at 3%, PPI at 2.6%.
Well, let's talk a little bit about food prices. I mean, we had sort of a classic sort of drought economics for a while. The drought went away, then the food prices were supposed to come down, they did. Where are they at the moment? How important are they a factor at the moment?
Well, as I indicated, they're around 2.5–3% year-on-year inflation. We're starting to see a bit of an uptick in some of the grain products, maize, wheat, bread, starting to pull up. Meat has typically been on a downward trajectory. So that has resulted in a rather sweet spot, I guess, for consumers, that we are seeing this low inflation rate. The weather has a large impact on food prices. Obviously, you've mentioned the drought back in 2015, 2016, and that is still playing itself out. Maize farmers are beginning to say that they expect a smaller crop going forward, and that could have an impact.
It seems the price of water seems to be having an impact on your figures as well.
You know, water is one of the most under-noticed of all components, both in CPI and in PPI. Water in the PPI is at 11%. In CPI, it's at about a similar level. Interestingly, there's a lot of focus on electricity because we have NERSA, lots of public hearings, the price is regulated at that sort of level, but this is not the case for water. And so the PPI is measuring both the water that farmers can extract from rivers and dams, as well as the price that the municipalities pay for purified water. And we're seeing both of these tracking double digits at the moment, which has been a slight uptick from previous years, but it's been fairly high, I'd say, for the past 5 years or so.
Does your data tell you why that's happening? I mean, I realize that some of the municipalities are trying to charge a little bit more for water to try and get people to change their behavior. There's a big conversation about that. Is that what's driving this, or are there other factors?
Well, I'm pretty sure if we go to simple economic supply and demand, that the supply of water is not what people would want it to be. And I think that because it's not a regulated price, that municipalities or service providers are able to charge kind of what they feel they can get rather than perhaps what a reasonable level is.
Well, let's go back to electricity. I mean, you talk about how that's a big focus, and there are these NERSA hearings, the National Energy Regulator of South Africa hearings that are taking place around the country. I mean, the Minerals Council sounded apocalyptic today when it suggested that it would be the end of gold mining in South Africa if power prices went up in the way that Eskom is asking. But electricity is becoming much more of an issue, and are you seeing exactly the same kind of impact on the numbers? Let me put it another way. We're seeing people talking about it. Should they be talking about it, in your view, as much as they actually are?
Well, look, there are different industries that have different dependencies on electricity. So certainly your big smelters, big manufacturing plants, mining are big users of electricity. They draw it directly from Eskom. We don't have to go into the issues around Eskom right now. consumers are obviously mainly getting from municipalities, and municipalities also have their own issues. But again, if we look at the pass-through, it's probably similar to what we've seen with fuel, that electricity makes up a proportion of the overall price. And there are a number of factors. So if you're a steel manufacturer, the price you're paying for iron ore may be as important or more important than the price you're paying for electricity.
So we take all of this together then. I mean, what sort of outlook are you expecting for how people are feeling? The PPI figures that you released today are input costs, essentially. When you look at when you make projections about what that's going to do to CPI going forward, what's the picture?
Yeah, look, we don't do projections per se,
sure,
but I think that we can certainly see at the food level, we can see some relationships, and at the moment they're tracking fairly consistently. There are some indications. So, for example, animal feeds are at 11%, even though live animals are actually a negative inflation. So these have mixed signals going through. I think overall the PPI doesn't have a massive impact directly on the CPI, partly because the CPI is mainly services and not goods, which is being measured in the PPI.
So, I mean, in a way, I suppose the overall question I want to ask someone like yourself, but I don't know if you're allowed to even give me an answer, is are we going to feel richer or poorer in the next few months? It seems actually quite tough to say. In some aspects of food prices are going up, so we might actually feel poorer, unless, of course, petrol continues to decline, which it probably won't, or Eskom are told to pause it.
Yeah, those are all factors that we're going to have to look at. Typically, how people feel depends on what they paid yesterday rather than a year ago, which is the way we typically report the numbers, and we don't think people's feelings are always a good measure of actual inflation. But I certainly think those are the food prices, electricity prices are going to be key factors going forward.
Patrick Kelly, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. The Chief Director of Price Statistics at Statistics South Africa. Well, that's as much as he's going to give us about how you're going to feel about the numbers that are coming through. Patrick, thank you so much. Really do appreciate it tonight.
Thank you, Faith.